Hey, welcome to episode 6. This is a Q&A episode. I've been collecting questions the last few days on social media and decided to put them all into just one video. Answers are going to be fairly straight to the point, and some of them may actually end up leading into bigger videos if the topic's big enough. But without further ado, let's get into it. The first question was, how did I get into concert photography? I'm going to give you the very shorthand version, but I had a strange entry into the market. I had worked in IT for many years and then got into wedding photography and discovered I wasn't built for that. The stress was annihilating me. So respect to any of you who do wedding photography. But it started making me hate my camera. So I realized I needed to do something else. Then really quite by chance, I spotted an ad in a newspaper for a graphic design job and applied for this job. And the reason I applied for it was because it was in a company that was like owned or invested in by U2. And it was a web development role, because I had spent some time previously as a web developer. So got the job. And in my first couple of weeks there, I met this amazing individual called Steve Averill, who actually named U2 and designed most of their album covers. And by showing him pictures where I'd, snuck a camera into a pub and that kind of thing, I convinced him to help me get a press pass. And he contacted U2 and got me into Don Valley Stadium in 2009 with the 3 songs, no flash pass. So it was kind of a weird start. And then I did nothing for a year because kind of, stuff was hitting the fan back home in Ireland at the time, economically, with the housing crisis and the like. And I had more pressing concerns. But about a year later, I did another job for U2 in France, in Paris, and in the Stade de France. And that was 3 songs on flash as well. And actually ended up getting a picture in Billboard magazine from that. That's another story. I definitely charged too little for that image, but hey, I'm grateful for the opportunity. And then I kind of used that portfolio then from those 2 gigs to really try and get work that would test my skills more, because, shooting amazingly lit concerts isn't really stretching you. And I started shooting a mixture of smaller venues and arenas in Dublin, really in exchange for parking fees or maybe not even that, over a couple of years, building up contacts until the point where I started picking up work. And the first big long-term client was the Script. And then that led on to others. So there is a longer explanation in more detail, but that's the weird route I took into it. The next question was, how much work do I do in post? So the answer is really not that much. I mean, it's mainly around shadows and highlights control, to be honest with you. That is 90% of it. A certain amount of noise reduction. Occasionally I will put a color cast across the shadows, for instance. But as regards, removing or adding things, never. When you shoot, and I guess you're shooting for documentary purposes, you never really start changing the image. You don't start taking a bottle off the stage or a towel off the edge of a drum kit. You don't remove that stuff, because when you do that, you're changing the environment. If, however, I'm working for a client and they want an image for a tour program, so the image becomes less documentary and more artistic in nature, and it could even be part of a collage on a page with other images, then you're okay to remove stuff, because it stops being a reportage image and more becomes an artistic creation. But still, things like, adding smoke or adding lights or that kind of stuff, that never happens. Other things that would edit, whether they be documentary or not, sometimes it might, in order to work with LEDs that are causing an issue. And this really actually answers another question that I was asked about dealing with LEDs. Occasionally, as many of you probably will have come across, sometimes poor LEDs in venues can create very difficult, washes of blue or purple or pink across the scene. And sometimes, people just convert to black and white, and that's all that they can do to work on the image or to save the image. It is possible. Now, I guess my post work is mainly done in Lightroom. It is possible in Lightroom, in the develop module. In fact, if you look in your screen now, at the bottom right of the screen in the develop module, in the calibration section, you can play with these different sliders and these different channels here. to adjust these to help, remove that cast. I've never found one setting that works perfectly for every given image, but for me, adjusting that calibration before I do other adjustments in the develop module is the key to taking an image that has that purple or blue wash and making it into something usable. How many images do I deliver for an artist if I'm working for them in one concert? Well, that depends on a number of factors. For argument's sake, if it's a standalone gig and maybe I'm only shooting one or two of that tour, it'll probably be the case that I'll end up, taking 2,000 to 2,500 images, and then as regards what I deliver them would probably anywhere between 150 and 300 images, edited images, and the timeline of which might be some of them that night, some of them the very next day, for things like social media, for instance, and then the balance maybe over the course of the next week. If I'm working on a tour where it's like several nights sequentially, I'm really not trying to get every facet of the gig every single night. And I'm using the fact that I'm on a tour to focus on different areas of the gig on different nights. I might even just work with one lens on one night, and I might go a whole night on just an 85 1.4 or a whole night on a 70-200. And, as a result of that, I may only be delivering from any given night, 30 or 40 images in that scenario, because I'm really honing in on particular areas of the gig and then getting the best from several nights in order to give the most complete and best quality of work I can give. How do I know where to be? Well, there's a couple of answers to this. One is, if it's an artist I've not worked for before, YouTube is your friend. And also talking to other photographers, obviously, who've shot the gig before you, who you happen to know. But YouTube is very often very handy if it's not the first gig on a tour, because you can look at fan videos on Facebook and Instagram, TikTok and YouTube and so on, and really get a preview of the set pieces that might happen, which when you're in a 3 songs no flash situation, might give you a severe leg up to capture a moment that no one else in the pit captures. If I'm working for the artist, it's quite a different scenario. You have to think of a gig as a culmination of the efforts of a whole load of different people, not just the band. And when you think of that, you think there are different aspects of the gig which are important to different people and different viewpoints that, may give you better information sometimes than the band can give you. So, for instance, chatting to the lighting design, the lighting engineer or the lighting designer, that's invaluable. Finding out from their perspective, what are the key moments of the show? What are the set pieces that they're most proud of? Or what are the moments that maybe they know that the band are most connected with? It could be that one member of the band has specifically had an idea for a specific moment. So you want to make sure you capture that well, because, the band are going to want that. It might be that you might want to talk to the person who's, involved in the stage design. I mean, there's a lot of very intricate designs on stage these days. And very often with boy bands and girl bands and the like, there can be quite elaborate pyro and I guess props on set. So getting in these different perspectives, even from people like costume designers, they allow you to get a sense of where the big moments are. And then I normally get a copy of the set list. And after chatting to these people, I write my little notes down. I have shorthand for where I want to be and just little letters beside each of the songs. Then I take a picture of the set list and I put it as a background image on my phone so I can just glance at it. And then I know where I am at any given moment, where I'm supposed to be or where I'm planning to go next. So that's a rough idea of the strategy. How do I get a variety of images with an artist which is quite static? I mean, occasionally, obviously, you get artists where, they're just sat in a stool playing the guitar and not moving much the whole gig. So part of it is obviously varying your composition and your perspective, because ultimately, if they're staying in one place, you can add variety by not doing the same thing every shot yourself. So it's a mixture of things like, for instance, it might be a case of using a wide lens very low to the stage. It could be a case of getting up on the stage, or a back right, back left corner, or behind the drum kit, and getting, a silhouette of them silhouetted against the crowd, depending on what the light is like. It could be about literally being, 90 degrees to them at the far right or far left of the stage. If there happens to be a spotlight that is kind of like shining across them, then you might be able to get some really nice side shots of them with a guitar. It's worth being aware also if it's a left-handed or right-handed guitar, so that when you take the shot, you're seeing the open front of the guitar, but not being blocked by the arm of it. So, always bear that in mind when you're, especially working with singer-songwriters, that you want to capture a shot that doesn't feel closed off by a guitar pointing the wrong way. Using a prime lens is always a great thing for adding variety to shots, because if you're just with a 24-70, in a very static environment, it can start to look a little samey. But with a prime lens at, say, 85mm or a 50, or a 135, and you get that separation of, your different focal planes, so you can throw your background out of focus. Things like, for instance, if it's a singer-songwriter who's tapping their shoe off the ground, or their fingers on the strings. I mean, if you're on a 135 or a 70-200, trying to get a shot, along the direction of the strings of the guitar, you might have to contort yourself a little bit to do it. But these are all the different things you have to think about for adding variety. Being clever with your shutter speed as well. A singer-songwriter might not be moving much, but their fingers are moving a lot. So you might shoot at a shutter speed like 1/60th or less, 1/40th, so that their body is motionless, but their arm and their hand on the strings of the guitar has motion blur. So you can add a bit of life to it there. So there's no real one quick answer to that question. You just have to use what you have to add variety through composition, perspective, and clever use of what's in the bag. How do you go about getting paid concert work? It took me a long time to figure this out. I would say that there is no one answer, and there's no easy answer that doesn't require an awful lot of persistence. So whatever I say now, you have to add lots of persistence to this, because it's the only way you're going to do it. But a big part of it is thinking outside of the box. And like I touched on earlier, not thinking of a gig as something that just is of interest to one group, but is a culmination of the efforts of a lot of different people. Once you get that into your mind, you realize that there are several different people and angles from which you can approach of people that might value your work. So it might be a case of trying to contact lighting design companies, and get pictures that feature from the sound desk or the lighting desk, that feature the desk and the operator in the foreground of shot, and the beautiful stage setup and the crowd in the back of the frame. It could be that you talk to the costume designers. It might even be something like an amplifier company. Like, for instance, if you have a particularly strong brand image of a piece of equipment in a shot that you're proud of from a gig which you shot 3 songs, no flash, and no pay. These images can end up paying later by having a look through them and saying, oh, I've got a particularly strong, image of this amplifier with this guitarist in shot. If that guitarist is well known and they're using that amplifier, there's a good chance that they've got a relationship with that company. And as a result, contacting that company can be a way to not only get paid for that shot, but potentially get future commissions from them, because they're not used to getting photographers approaching in this way. Another example of that is merchandise companies. Again, use your portfolio of gigs you've shot for free with 3 songs, press pass, and look for gigs or artists who are coming back on comeback tours, and submit your images to these merchandise companies who you see have done their tour programs for the previous tours. It all involves quite a bit of legwork and Googling and persistence and willing to take a knockback and keep going. But once you start thinking about a gig in these ways of multiple faceted entry points, then once you get in via one of them, bear in mind these people, they're known to the band, so they have to show your work to the band before they can get permission to use it for their socials. So they not only do you get an intro or CC'd in an email, but it might be that someone else in the ecosystem may want your images. The band may want to use the images you took for the sound desk company. Or it might be that the sound desk company talks to the set design people over lunch and they say, oh, we got this lovely picture of your nice set. And then they give them your email and suddenly they want to buy the same images. So that, for me, is the attitude, to be honest, and how I managed to turn it into a job. And I wouldn't still be doing it if it weren't for that, to be honest with you. So how did I maintain relationship with clients during the pandemic? That's a really good question that no one's asked me. I'm lucky, I think, that, with most of my clients, I have a really good relationship. And there's a lot of strong friendships I have with people in various bands among my clients. So staying in touch was really quite an automatic thing. Making that time, I guess, useful was also important because, over the years, you know yourself, there are tons of projects which go on the long finger. Oh, I'll do that. I recorded this and I'll do that sometime, and I'll do this and I'll do that. There were so many things over the years, little projects and ideas that had been put on the long finger as something to do on a rainy day. That's what happened with the pandemic. So one of the things I did was seek out things that I'd shot and, that I'd worked with and not necessarily used over the years with various different clients to find out if any of that content was something that they wanted to do something with. And really, that's one of the things that really got me personally through the pandemic and gave me work to do a lot of the time. I was also doing quite a lot of work with Rick Astley as well over the pandemic, which was absolutely fantastic. Including things like helping him with various things he was doing on TikTok and various YouTube covers he was filming in his home studio, which was brilliant. But it was very much a challenging time. But I guess I do work on a basis of developing a relationship with my clients, so I'm happy to say staying in touch with something that kind of happened organically, which is great. So one of you asked, what are the key things that I keep in my bag, apart from the standard things like cameras, and lenses? So the first of which was definitely be having a good lens cloth. So this is a chamois style cloth, which I find great, easy to wash, really, really good at cleaning the lens really, really quickly without any smears. You generally don't need to use any solution of any kind. Always, always, always have it in the bag. Next, and I won't be throwing this, it's always good to have a microphone in the bag. Sometimes if I'm, unexpectedly asked to capture some video of a particular moment, it's nice having this to be able to put it on the stage. It may well be that the sound desk is recording the audio anyway, so it's not a major concern, the audio quality. But you don't want to rely on that, particularly when you've only got a couple of moments' notice. And I always have a couple of AA batteries in the bag as well to go with it. As well as that, I always have a lapel mic for unexpected, interview piece I might need to record backstage. It could be a behind the scenes soundbite. I may be hired as a photographer for a gig, and it may be that I get suddenly asked just to capture some important bit of video that they need. I mean, occasionally I'm, hired to shoot video as well, and I've discussed that in previous videos. But always have this with you. The next thing is good card reader. Even if you don't plan on, bringing a laptop and you're not bringing one, and but you're not expecting to need to provide any images that night, having a good card reader is very, very handy. If you have an unexpected requirement from the band management where they suddenly need an image after, worst case scenario, you have a card reader with you that can plug into one of their laptops you can get an image off and download something that can handle raw images, and you can do a quick edit and give it to them. It's also handy if you're just needing to help out another photographer in a bind or a videographer. If everyone always had one of these in their bags, it would just make everybody happier. Bear in mind, if you are bringing a USB-C one like me, it's worth having an adapter that connects it to a regular USB port, which you can pick up on Amazon quite easily. And the next thing, although I never use it, is a flash. Well, I wouldn't say I never use it. I never use it during gigs. But it's not a particularly fancy one. It's a speed light. And it can be extremely handy just for backstage if you're asked to get, in a picture in a quite a low-lit area. It might be that you're getting just, a picture with a group of fans in a terribly lit room. It can be quite handy. I like to avoid using flash most of the time because I like to... I will obviously always during gigs I never use it, but backstage I try and avoid it as well. But it's good to have it in the bag. I mean, it's true these things add a bit of extra weight, but it has been very, very useful on occasion. And like I mentioned before, make sure you carry your AA's as well. Ideally rechargeable, to be honest with you. Better for the environment and cheaper too, so double win. Lastly, but not least, and you're wondering what else I've got down here, is... obviously a camera bag, but there's something on the bag that I'm going to show you. So whenever I get a bag, these handles on the zips, I don't know about you, but they always break. This is a green bag. It's going to be fun with green screen, but anyway. You see these little keyring, buy little keyring things on Amazon, and these make your zips a lot stronger because the pulley things, whether they're cord or something, they always snap. These are much easier to grab. If it's low light and you can barely see in your bag, but also they don't snap. So, however many is on your camera bag, buy a pack of 10 of these and cut off all the, little strap things on the zips and replace it with these, and you'll thank me later. Or maybe you won't, but hey. So one question I got a lot was, do I shoot in RAW or JPEG? So the answer to that is I always shoot in RAW. The reason for that is simple. If you imagine that your image, all the information in your image is contained between here and here. Now, if a RAW, which captures the full range that your camera is capable of capturing from dark to bright and all the detail at the different levels of illumination across the color spectrum. If you imagine your RAW camera, it's capturing everything in RAW mode between here and here. Now, certain cameras will have what their maximum area they can capture, what's referred to as their dynamic range. That width will be different. So for argument's sake, something like the Sony a7S III is known to have a very wide dynamic range, so it can capture a lot of information within a single image. Now, if you choose to shoot JPEG, your camera is selectively taking a section from within that gap. It might be between here and here, and it's choosing what it gets saved. Now, you don't really control what gets saved. You're just trusting the camera to make that decision. Now, when you come to edit that image, if it's a quite evenly exposed image outdoors, it may look next to no different from the RAW. However, say for argument's sake, there is a situation where, the crowd are quite hard to see, but the stage is well lit. The information that's in the shadows in the RAW file is exactly what has been dumped in the JPEG. So when you start pushing up the shadows, you'll see a lot more banding and noise in the JPEG than you will in the RAW. It's the same if you maybe have overexposed lights and you're wanting to pull back the highlights. Anytime that you want to retrieve information outside of what's visible right now, RAW will have much more of that information. JPEG, by its very nature, won't. So as a result, to give yourself the most flexibility in post and the highest quality image you can for the best possible output, you really want to shoot in RAW. So another question I got asked a lot was, how do you expose for both the band and the stage? Well, the answer is very often you don't expose for both, you expose for one. And because you know your gear and you know how far you can push the shadows and the highlights and the like, you know how far you can manipulate the less ideally exposed area of the image. So it might be the case that I might expose for the stage and what's happening on the stage, and know that I can lift the shadows in the crowd. If, however, I feel that it's going to require lifting them that little bit too far, based on looking at the histogram or looking at the image in the back of the camera after I've taken it. Really what I would do in that scenario is I might overexpose slightly for the stage. It might be for a stop or two on the stage, knowing that I can pull back the highlights in order to give me a bit of extra information in the image, in the crowd section, in the lower lit area. So there's really no one answer to this question, because a lot of it is about, the gear that you're using and how wide that dynamic range is and how much you can get away with pulling the shadows in post and pulling back the highlights. Or equally, even what ISO you're shooting at. Because if you're at extremely high ISO, you might not want to start lifting shadows any further, because you'll make the grain all the more prominent. But really, you can't really expose for both at the same time, because often the illumination is entirely different on them both. So knowing your gear is probably the most important answer to that question. So thank you to all of you who sent in the questions. Really appreciate it. It's been fun going through them, and got some bizarre ones as well that I didn't quite go into. Might make it into an outtake show at some point. But thanks for stopping by. Please subscribe. It'll be somewhere where I'm pointing. So click that button wherever you can, and like the video and share it if you don't mind. That'd be really helpful. But until next time, take care.